I've always known there was something unsettling about our farmhouse. Nestled at the edge of a dense forest, its isolation was both its beauty and its curse. The silence here was different. It wasn't just the absence of noise, but a heavy, pressing quiet that seemed to muffle even the sound of your own breath. As a child, I found comfort in this solitude, or so I thought, until the day my perception of everything changed irrevocably. It happened in a blink, the kind of moment that carves a before and an after into your life. I was young, innocent to the complexities of life and death, unaware that such concepts could intertwine in the most horrifying ways. On that day, I witnessed something. No, I won't spoil the story from its inception. Let's just say it was a traumatic event, one that a child's mind couldn't fully comprehend, let alone process. It was not just the sight but the confusion, the fear, and the silence that followed. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed the horror, leaving no trace but the scars it etched into my young mind. That day, the shadows seemed to stretch longer in our home, and I found myself peering into mirrors, half expecting to see something else staring back. Not ghosts or phantoms, mind you, I've never believed in such things, even then. No, I feared seeing the truth reflected back at me, the reality of what I had seen, what I had become a part of without my consent. This story, my story, isn't about hauntings of the spectral kind. It's about the shadows that live within us, the dark reflections we catch in the mirror when we're not quite looking. It's about how a single moment can alter the course of a life, twisting it into shapes unrecognizable, leading down paths so dark they seem to have no end. So, as I invite you into the depths of my memories, into the heart of the secluded farmhouse where my twisted perception of life and death took root, remember this. The most terrifying monsters are those that dwell in the human mind. And sometimes, they're closer than we think, lurking in the shadows, or perhaps, in the mirror. Growing up, the farmhouse was my entire world, a vast expanse of open fields and dense forests that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was a child's paradise, or so it seemed, filled with endless adventures and mysteries waiting to be uncovered. Yet, even in those days of innocent exploration, there was an undercurrent of solitude that pervaded every corner of my existence. It wasn't loneliness, not exactly, for I had the company of my parents, but a sense of isolation that seemed to seep into my very bones. My earliest memories are painted in hues of golden sunsets and the rich, earthy scent of the soil after rain. I remember the sound of my own laughter, echoing across the fields, and the way the grass felt under my bare feet as I ran without care, chasing the fleeting shadows of the clouds above. There was beauty in that simplicity, a purity of life that I now realize was a rare gift. But even amidst this idyllic setting, there were moments that hinted at something more, something lurking just beneath the surface of my childish understanding. I recall finding a bird's nest once, nestled in the crook of a tree, the tiny occupants inside chirping hungrily for their mother. I watched, fascinated, as she returned, feeding them with tender care. Yet, the very next day, I found the nest overturned, the chicks gone, a stark reminder of the fragility of life. It was my first encounter with death, albeit at the hands of nature, and it left a profound impression on me. My parents were distant figures in these memories, always busy with the endless work that comes with running a farm. They were loving, in their way, but theirs was a hard love, shaped by the land and the seasons. Conversations were often practical, focused on tasks and responsibilities, leaving little room for the emotional nurturing I craved. I learned early to find solace in my surroundings, to listen to the whispers of the wind and the stories it carried. Even then, I felt an inexplicable draw to the shadows, to the spaces between light and darkness. There was something comforting about them, a sense of belonging that I couldn't find anywhere else. I spent hours exploring the edges of the forest, drawn by a curiosity that felt as natural to me as breathing. It was in these moments of solitude that I felt most myself, most alive, even if I couldn't fully articulate why. Looking back, I see how these early experiences shaped me, laying the foundation for the person I would become. The isolation of the farmhouse, the beauty and brutality of nature, the silent longing for something more, they all wove together into a tapestry of memories that I carried with me, a backdrop against which the events that would define my life unfolded. It was a childhood marked by contrasts, where moments of pure joy were shadowed by an awareness of the darker aspects of existence, a duality that would come to define my twisted perception of life and death. There's a distinct clarity that comes with recalling the moments that divide your life into a before and after. For me, that division is stark, a line drawn so deeply in the sands of my memory that everything else seems blurred in comparison. This particular day, the one that irrevocably altered the course of my existence, began like any other, with the sun rising over the endless fields of our farm, casting long shadows that danced across the dew-laden grass. It was a day that promised nothing out of the ordinary, yet by its end, my perception of the world would be shattered beyond recognition. I remember wandering farther than usual that day, my youthful curiosity pulling me towards the dense forest that bordered our land. It was a place I had ventured into many times before, drawn by its mystery and the sense of adventure it promised. The forest felt like a different world, a realm where the rules of the outside didn't apply, where the whispers of the ancient trees spoke of secrets waiting to be discovered. As I delved deeper into the woods, the light dimmed, filtered through the thick canopy above, casting everything in a greenish hue. It was serene, almost sacred, and I moved quietly, as if not to disturb the sanctity of the place. That's when I heard it, the sound that would become the demarcation of my life's before and after. It was a scream, so raw and filled with terror that it cut through the silence of the forest like a knife. My heart raced, and for a moment I froze, unsure of what to do. My initial thought was to run, to flee back to the safety of the open fields and the sunlight. But something else, a morbid curiosity or perhaps a sense of duty, propelled me forward. I moved towards the source of the sound, my steps hesitant at first, then more determined as the screams continued, growing more desperate. What I found was a scene that would haunt me for the rest of my days. A man and a woman, strangers to me, were struggling by a shallow stream that cut through the forest. The man was large, his hands wrapped around the woman's throat, his expression one of uncontrollable rage. The woman's eyes met mine for a brief moment, filled with a plea for help that I didn't know how to answer. I was paralyzed, a silent witness to a horror I couldn't comprehend. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The man released his grip, and the woman fell to the ground, lifeless. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the ragged breaths of the man as he looked around, as if only now realizing the potential for witnesses. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I understood the gravity of what I had witnessed. Fear, pure and primal, surged through me, and I turned and ran as fast as my legs could carry me, not stopping until I burst through the door of our farmhouse, gasping for air and for the safety I no longer felt. I never spoke of what I saw that day, not to my parents, not to anyone. It became my secret, a heavy burden that I carried alone. I convinced myself that it was a nightmare, a figment of my imagination, but the truth of it gnawed at me, a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that lurked within others. That day changed everything, warping my understanding of the world and my place in it. It was the day I lost my innocence, the day the shadows in the mirror began to whisper a little louder, drawing me into a reality I could never have imagined. After that day, everything changed, though outwardly, my life continued much as it had before. The farm, with its endless chores and seasonal rhythms, demanded attention, leaving little room for dwelling on the past. Yet, beneath the surface, a transformation was underway, one that set me apart from my peers in ways I couldn't fully understand at the time. I grew up feeling different, marked by an invisible scar that altered my interactions with the world around me. The other children seemed to sense it too, keeping their distance as if afraid that whatever had changed me might be contagious. I found their games childish, their concerns trivial, unable to share in their joy or understand their fears. It wasn't that I felt superior, but rather disconnected, as though a glass wall separated me from the rest of humanity. This sense of isolation wasn't entirely unpleasant. In fact, there was a certain freedom in knowing that I didn't fit the mold, that I wasn't bound by the same expectations and norms. I embraced my solitude, finding solace in the quiet company of the farm and the secrets of the forest that had been the backdrop to my life-altering experience. There, among the ancient trees and whispering winds, I felt a sense of belonging, a connection to something deep and unspoken that resonated with the turmoil within me. As I transitioned from childhood into adolescence, this disconnection only deepened. While my classmates were preoccupied with their burgeoning relationships and the drama of teenage life, I found myself drawn to more macabre interests. Books on anatomy and the biology of death fascinated me, offering a glimpse into the mechanics of life's end that both terrified and intrigued me. I began to collect dead things, birds, mice, and other small animals that I found during my wanderings. It wasn't the act of death that interested me, but the moment after, the transition from life to whatever came next. I studied them, sketched them, and when I was brave enough, dissected them, driven by a need to understand the boundary between existence and oblivion. My parents, preoccupied with their own struggles and the demands of the farm, seemed to chalk up my odd behavior to the eccentricities of youth. They were not unkind, but their love was a practical sort, focused on survival and the hard truths of life. Emotional support, discussions about feelings or the traumas that might lurk in a young girl's heart, were luxuries we couldn't afford. So, I learned to wear a mask, to perform the role of the dutiful daughter, while my true self retreated further into the shadows. This period of my life was a lonely one, but it was also a time of intense self-discovery. I realized that my experiences had given me a unique perspective, an insight into the fragility and preciousness of life that others seemed oblivious to. I didn't resent them for it, how could they know what they had never seen? But it underscored the feeling that I was walking a path meant only for me, one that would lead me to truths others were content to ignore. In this way, I grew up different, marked by an event that had irrevocably changed my understanding of the world. It was a solitary existence, but it was mine, and in it, I found a strange kind of peace. Yet, as the years passed, the shadows that had whispered to me in the mirror began to speak more insistently, urging me toward a destiny I could feel, but not yet see. It was a call to delve deeper into the mysteries of life and death, a challenge I was increasingly unable to resist. As I navigated the murky waters of adolescence, the first tangible signs of my deep-seated difference began to manifest in ways that even I couldn't ignore. It was as though the event I had witnessed in the forest had planted a seed within me, one that had lain dormant until the fertile ground of my developing psyche allowed it to sprout. This emergence was gradual at first, subtle enough that it might have gone unnoticed by an outside observer, yet to me, it was as if a dam had been breached, releasing a flood of previously suppressed fascinations and impulses. I remember the first time I brought a dead bird home. It was a small thing, a sparrow, its body still warm but lifeless, eyes closed as if in peaceful slumber. Something about the fragility of its form, the delicate feathers, and the way its tiny chest no longer rose and fell with breath, captivated me. I laid it out on an old piece of cloth, studying it for hours, tracing the patterns of its feathers with a tentative finger, marveling at the intricacy of nature's design. There was no malice in my actions, no desire to cause harm. It was a pursuit of understanding, a need to connect with the cycle of life and death that I had been forcibly introduced to. This initial act of curiosity became a ritual. I would seek out the deceased creatures of the forest and fields, each time feeling a mix of sorrow for their passing and awe at the silent beauty of their end. My collection grew, each specimen carefully documented and preserved. I felt like a guardian of their stories, a keeper of the threshold between worlds. My parents, when they eventually discovered my macabre hobby, reacted with a mixture of concern and confusion. They saw it as an unhealthy obsession, a fixation on death that was unnatural for a girl my age. In their eyes, I needed to be guided back to the light, to be reminded of the beauty and joy of life. They didn't understand that, to me, there was no division between the beauty of life and the dignity of death. Both were integral parts of the same cycle, each giving meaning to the other. Despite their attempts to steer me towards more conventional interests, my fascination only deepened. I began to read voraciously on the subject, consuming texts on forensic science, mortuary practices across cultures, and the philosophies surrounding death and dying. My nights were filled with dreams of shadowy figures and silent, starlit ceremonies that felt as real as they were enigmatic. It was as if I was being called, drawn towards a deeper understanding of the mysteries that lay at the heart of existence. This period marked the beginning of my isolation, not just physically, from my increasingly worried parents and the peers who found me strange, but also emotionally, from the version of myself that had once run through the fields without a care. I was changing, evolving into someone who saw the world through a lens tinted with shades of mortality. It was a lonely path, but it was mine, and I walked it with a sense of purpose that nothing else in my life had ever provided. Looking back, these first signs were a harbinger of what was to come, the early whispers of a storm gathering on the horizon. They marked the end of my innocence, not just in terms of my exposure to death, but in my understanding of my own nature. I was different, yes, but this difference was not a flaw to be corrected. It was a gift, a unique perspective that allowed me to see the beauty in the shadows, to understand the poetry in the silence that follows the end. The transition from fascination to action was subtle, almost imperceptible at first. My explorations and studies had filled me with a profound sense of connection to the cycle of life and death, but there remained a barrier, a line I had yet to cross. It was as if I stood on the precipice of understanding, yearning to leap, but held back by the remnants of my childhood innocence and societal norms that whispered of morality and restraint. Yet, the call within me grew louder, an insistent drumbeat that urged me to step beyond mere observation into a realm of direct engagement. The day I crossed that line is etched into my memory with a clarity that rivals the day in the forest. It was a day much like any other, with the sun casting long shadows across the land, the air filled with the scent of earth and growth. I found a rabbit then, injured by a predator but still clinging to life, its eyes wide with fear and pain. I remember kneeling beside it, feeling an overwhelming surge of empathy and connection. Here was a creature on the cusp of death, and I, the only witness to its final moments. What I did next was driven by a compulsion I neither fully understood nor could resist. I wanted to ease its passage, to be the guiding hand that led it from one existence to the next. And so, with a gentleness that belied the gravity of my actions, I ended its life. The act was quick, as painless as I could make it, but the finality of it was profound. I held the rabbit in my arms as it took its last breath, feeling a mix of sorrow and relief, as if I had both taken something precious and given a gift of mercy. This moment marked my first deliberate step over the line that divides life from death, an act of taking life that went beyond mere curiosity to something deeper, more primal. It was a turning point, one that set me on a path from which there was no return. The sense of power and responsibility was intoxicating, a confirmation of the role I felt destined to play in the natural order. In the days and weeks that followed, I found myself revisiting that moment in my mind, analyzing my emotions and motivations. There was guilt, yes, a recognition of the taboo I had broken, but it was overshadowed by a sense of rightness, a belief that my actions had been driven by a deeper understanding of the cycle of life and death. I had not acted out of cruelty or malice, but out of a desire to connect, to bridge the gap between observer and participant. This crossing of the line brought with it a profound isolation, a realization that my actions had set me apart from those around me in a way that words could never fully convey. I could share my thoughts with no one, could expect no understanding or acceptance from a society that feared and shunned death. And so, I retreated further into my own world, a realm where I grappled with the implications of my actions and the knowledge that I had irrevocably changed the course of my life. As I ventured further down this path, my actions became bolder, driven by a need to explore the boundaries of my newfound role. I became both guardian and taker of life, a solitary figure moving through the shadows, always seeking, always questioning. It was a lonely existence, but one that I embraced with a fervor that bordered on obsession. For in crossing the line, I had found my purpose, a calling that transcended the mundane concerns of the living, a journey into the heart of darkness that promised to reveal the ultimate truth of our existence. The unraveling of the world as I knew it didn't happen suddenly. It was a gradual process, like the slow fraying of a rope that holds fast until one day, under just a bit too much strain, it gives way. My actions, once confined to the secrecy of the forest and the solitude of my room, began to cast ripples through the fabric of my small, tightly knit community. It was inevitable, perhaps, that the boundary I had so carefully navigated between my inner world and the outside would begin to blur. The first signs of unraveling were subtle, whispers carried on the wind, glances that lingered too long, an air of suspicion that seemed to cloud the eyes of those I encountered. I could feel the shift in the atmosphere, a palpable tension that grew with each passing day. It was as if the community sensed that something was amiss, though they couldn't quite pinpoint the source of their unease. My parents were the first to confront me, their worry etched in the lines of their faces. They had noticed the change in me, the way I withdrew further into myself, my increasing absences explained away by vague mentions of exploring the woods or studying. The questions they asked were gentle, tinged with concern rather than accusation, but they pierced me all the same. How could I explain the unexplainable? How could I articulate the depth of my connection to the cycle of life and death without revealing the darkness that lay at its heart? I deflected, offering assurances that were half-truths at best, but the seed of doubt had been planted. My nocturnal activities, once a solitary pursuit, now carried the weight of scrutiny. I became more cautious, my excursions into the forest timed to avoid detection. It wasn't long before the rumors started, whispers of strange behavior and unnatural obsessions that spread like wildfire through the community. I heard them, snippets of conversation that ceased abruptly as I approached, the sudden hush that fell over a room when I entered. The isolation that I had once embraced now felt like a cage, trapping me in a web of suspicion and fear. The turning point came with the disappearance of a local pet, a dog that had wandered too far from its home and never returned. The grief of the family was palpable, their loss a tangible reminder of the fragility of life. When suspicion turned my way, fueled by my known fascination with death and the secretive nature of my wanderings, I felt the full weight of the community's gaze. I was questioned, a polite but firm inquiry that left me shaken, not because I was guilty. I had no part in the animal's disappearance, but because it signaled the end of my anonymity, the moment when my private obsessions became public spectacle. The unraveling was now complete, my one secret life laid bare for all to see. The understanding I sought, the connection to the cycle of life and death that had driven me to the edge of society, was now the very thing that ostracized me. I stood at the center of a storm of my own making, my actions and motives dissected and judged by those who could never understand the depth of my journey. In the midst of this turmoil, I realized that my quest had led me to a precipice, not of understanding, but of alienation. The bridge I had sought to build between life and death had become a barrier between myself and the world. As the fabric of my life unraveled, I was left to ponder the cost of my obsession, the price of a truth sought in the shadows, and the realization that some doors, once opened, can never be closed. In the thick of my isolation, with whispers and wary glances trailing my every move, a singular obsession took root within me. It was an urge that went beyond the mere collection of the deceased or the passive observation of life's fragile terminus. It was a need to create, to orchestrate a moment so profound, so imbued with the essence of life and death, that it would stand as my magnum opus, my ultimate contribution to the unspoken dialogue between the two. This impulse did not arise from malice, rather, it was born of a deep-seated desire to manifest my understanding of the world's delicate balance. I envisioned a tableau that would capture the beauty of life's impermanence, a scene so poignant and filled with truth that it could not be ignored or misunderstood. My hands, once mere instruments of study and collection, now itched to craft a moment of revelation, to bridge the gap I had so painstakingly explored between existence and oblivion. The planning of my masterpiece was meticulous, carried out with the utmost care and consideration. I sought not to harm but to enlighten, to create a spectacle that would serve as a testament to my journey and the truths I had unearthed along the way. The subject of my work, I decided, would be an animal, a deer, perhaps, for their grace and beauty epitomized the fleeting nature of life itself. I spent days scouting the woods, searching for the perfect candidate. When at last I found it, a young buck with eyes as deep and mysterious as the forest itself, I felt a kinship, a sense of shared destiny. I followed him at a distance, learning his habits and patterns, waiting for the moment when fate would decree our paths to converge. The night I chose was moonless, the darkness a canvas upon which I would etch my vision. I approached him with reverence, my actions guided by a clarity of purpose I had never before experienced. The method I employed was humane, a kindness that ensured his passage from this world to the next, was free of pain or fear. As he lay there, the life fading from his eyes, I felt a profound sadness mingled with a sense of completion. This was my offering, my bridge between worlds, crafted not from malice, but from a place of deep respect and understanding. I arranged the scene with care, positioning him beneath the canopy of stars, a silent guardian watching over our final act. Around him, I placed tokens of the forest, leaves, stones, and flowers, each selected for their symbolic significance, creating a tableau that spoke of life's ephemeral beauty and the inevitability of death. When dawn broke, painting the sky with hues of pink and gold, I stepped back to behold my work. It was a masterpiece, not in the traditional sense, but as a profound expression of the truths I had gleaned from my communion with the shadows. I had created something that transcended the sum of its parts, a work that stood as a testament to my journey and the lessons learned along the way. But the reception of my masterpiece was not what I had envisioned. To the uninitiated, it was a scene of horror, a macabre display that spoke not of beauty and balance, but of madness and morbidity. The discovery of the deer, arranged with such deliberate care, ignited a firestorm of outrage and fear. I had intended to enlighten, to elevate the discourse on life and death to a plane of understanding and acceptance. Instead, I found myself the focus of an investigation, a pariah accused of grotesque crimes against nature. In the end, my masterpiece, the culmination of my life's work and understanding, was dismantled, dismissed as the product of a disturbed mind. The bridge I had sought to build was destroyed, the gap between my world and theirs widened beyond repair. I was left to face the consequences of my actions, not as an enlightened guide, but as a misguided soul lost in the shadows, my attempt to illuminate the beauty of our existence, reduced to a cautionary tale of obsession and transgression. The fallout from my masterpiece was swift and unforgiving. What I had envisioned as a profound statement, a testament to the intricate dance between life and death, was interpreted by the world around me as something far more sinister. The gap between my intentions and the community's reception could not have been wider. My art, my expression of the deepest truths I had discovered, was seen not as a bridge but as a barrier, an insurmountable divide between myself and those I had hoped to reach. The confrontation came on an overcast day, the sky heavy with the threat of rain, mirroring the tumult within me. The local authorities, having been alerted to the bizarre scene in the woods, arrived at my doorstep with questions I had no answers for. How could I explain the unexplainable? How could I convey the depth of my connection to the cycle of life and death to those who viewed the world through a lens of black and white, unable to perceive the shades of gray in between? Their questions were direct, probing for the reasoning behind my actions, seeking to understand what they deemed to be an act of cruelty. I struggled to articulate my motivations, to explain that what I had done was not born of a desire to harm, but to highlight the beauty and the transient nature of existence. But my words fell on deaf ears, lost in the chasm between my world and theirs. As the confrontation escalated, I could see the disbelief and horror etched on their faces, a mirror to the community's broader reaction. It was clear that no explanation, no matter how heartfelt or earnest, could bridge the gap that had opened between us. I was an outsider, my actions incomprehensible and frightening to those who had never questioned the boundaries of life and death as I had. The realization that I was alone, truly alone, in my quest for understanding was a blow more devastating than any punishment the authorities could mete out. The isolation I had once embraced as a means to explore the depths of my curiosity had become a prison, locking me away from the world I had hoped to enlighten. In the end, the confrontation was not just with the authorities or the community, but with myself. It forced me to reckon with the consequences of my actions, to confront the reality that my pursuit of understanding had led me down a path far removed from the rest of humanity. I had sought to transcend the ordinary, to explore the liminal spaces between life and death, but in doing so, I had crossed a line that society was unwilling to breach. The confrontation ended with a stark choice laid before me. To continue down this solitary path, forever marked by my actions, or to retreat from the brink, to attempt to find my way back to a world that no longer understood or welcomed me. It was a moment of reckoning, a realization that the search for truth, no matter how noble its intentions, can sometimes lead us into darkness rather than light. The aftermath of the confrontation was a period of profound introspection and isolation. The authorities, though skeptical and disturbed by my actions, found no grounds for criminal charges. My masterpiece was unsettling, yes, but not illegal. The community's reaction, however, was another matter entirely. In the days and weeks that followed, I found myself retreating further into the shadows, my only solace the understanding that my intentions, though misunderstood, had been pure. The farmhouse, once a place of solitude and peace, now felt like a cage, a physical reminder of the chasm that lay between myself and the rest of the world. The whispers of the forest, which had once filled me with a sense of connection and purpose, now echoed with the weight of my solitude. Reflection became my constant companion, as I pondered the path that had led me to this point. I questioned everything: my motivations, my actions, and the naivety that had led me to believe I could convey the depth of my understanding to those who had not walked my path. The realization that my quest for connection had resulted in the ultimate disconnection was a bitter pill to swallow. Yet, in the quiet that followed the storm, I found a certain clarity. I began to see my actions not through the lens of what I had intended, but through the impact they had on the world around me. The line I had crossed, in my pursuit of understanding, had consequences that rippled far beyond my own experience. I had underestimated the power of societal norms and the fear that arises from confronting the unknown. My masterpiece, intended as a celebration of life's transient beauty, was instead a mirror reflecting back the collective fears and taboos surrounding death. This period of isolation forced me to confront the most challenging question of all. Was the pursuit of my truth worth the cost? The solitude, the ostracization, the pain of being misunderstood, had it brought me any closer to the understanding I sought? Or had it merely driven me deeper into the recesses of my own mind, away from the very cycle of life and death I had sought to comprehend? In the aftermath of my actions, I realized that the search for truth is not a journey to be undertaken lightly. It demands a willingness to confront not only the mysteries of the universe, but also the darkness within oneself. The path I had chosen was littered with lessons learned too late, a stark reminder that the quest for understanding can sometimes lead us away from the light and into the shadows. As the community slowly moved on, the whispers fading into the background of daily life, I was left to navigate the wreckage of my world. The bridge I had sought to build lay in ruins, a testament to the folly of reaching too far, too fast. Yet, within the rubble, I found the seeds of a new understanding, a realization that true connection lies not in grand gestures or profound revelations, but in the simple act of living, of being part of the world, however flawed or misunderstood. The aftermath of my confrontation with reality was not the end of my journey, but a beginning. A chance to rebuild, to find a new way to engage with the mysteries that had once consumed me. It was an opportunity to forge a new path, one that acknowledged the limits of my quest, while still honoring the depth of my curiosity. In the silence that followed the storm, I began to understand that the most profound truths are often found not in the darkness, but in the light of our shared human experience, in the connections that bind us to each other, and to the ever-turning wheel of life and death. In the quiet aftermath, amidst a solitude that had become my sanctuary and my prison, I found myself adrift in a sea of reflections. The world outside continued its relentless march forward, unperturbed by the tumult that had upended my existence. Yet, within the confines of my own mind, time seemed to stand still, allowing me the space to ponder the journey that had led me to this point of isolation and introspection. I thought back to my childhood, to the innocence and curiosity that had first drawn me to the mysteries of life and death. There was a purity in that early fascination, untainted by the complexities and expectations of the adult world. It was a reminder of a time when my questions were driven by a genuine desire to understand the world around me, rather than an attempt to challenge or transcend it. As I reflected on the path my life had taken, I couldn't help but wonder where the turning point had been. When had my innocent curiosity crossed the line into obsession? When had my desire to understand the cycle of life and death become a solitary quest that distanced me from those around me? These questions haunted me, echoing through the silence of my self-imposed exile. I pondered the nature of my masterpiece, the culmination of my efforts to bridge the gap between life and death. In my quest for connection, I had instead found disconnection, not just from the community around me, but from the very essence of what it means to be human. I had sought to illuminate the beauty in death, to demystify it, to bring it into the light. Instead, I had alienated myself, casting my lot with the shadows I had so fervently explored. The reflections that occupied my days and nights were not limited to my actions and their consequences. They also turned inward, forcing me to confront the parts of myself I had long ignored or suppressed. I had to acknowledge the darkness that lay within me, the part of me that found beauty in the macabre, that saw death not as an end, but as a transformation. It was a sobering realization, one that demanded I reconcile these aspects of my identity with the person I hoped to become. In this period of introspection, I also grappled with the concept of legacy. What did I hope to leave behind through my actions? A new understanding of the thin veil between life and death, or a cautionary tale of the dangers of delving too deeply into the unknown. The line between enlightenment and madness, I had learned, was thinner than I had ever imagined. Yet, despite the turmoil, the reflections that filled my days were not entirely devoid of hope. In confronting the shadows, in acknowledging the missteps and miscalculations that had led me to the brink, I also found glimmers of light. I began to see the possibility of a future where my fascination with life and death could coexist with a connection to the living world around me. A future where my journey into the darkness could inform a more compassionate, understanding engagement with the cycle of life. These reflections, painful and illuminating in equal measure, were the first steps toward healing. They allowed me to begin the process of reintegration, not as the person I had been before my descent into obsession, but as someone who had traversed the depths and emerged with a deeper understanding of the complexities of existence. In the end, the reflections that had once seemed like a punishment became a gift, offering a path forward through the labyrinth of my own making, guided by the lessons learned in the shadows. The journey through the shadows, the exploration of the delicate balance between life and death, had led me to a place of profound isolation, but also to a deeper understanding of myself and the world around me. As the dust settled and the echoes of my actions faded into the background of a community moving on, I found myself at a crossroads, facing the daunting task of rebuilding from the ruins of my past endeavors. In this quiet space of rebuilding, I discovered a newfound appreciation for the simple, unremarkable moments that make up the fabric of life. The warmth of the sun on my face, the sound of laughter, the beauty of a landscape untouched by the complexities of human sorrow. These experiences, once overlooked in my quest for deeper truths, now held a significance that I had failed to appreciate in my earlier years. My fascination with the cycle of life and death remained, but it had transformed. No longer a solitary pursuit driven by a need to transcend the mundane, it became a quiet reflection on the interconnectedness of all things, a meditation on the beauty and tragedy inherent in existence. I began to share my thoughts, not as grandiose statements or attempts to shock, but as conversations, invitations to explore the mysteries of life and death with openness and compassion. In this new chapter, I found ways to bridge the gap I had once widened through my actions. I volunteered, offering my time and energy to causes that celebrated life, that provided comfort in the face of death. I wrote, not of my own experiences, but of the universal truths that bind us, of the shared journey from birth to death that every creature undertakes. The community's response was cautious at first, the memory of my past actions a barrier to immediate acceptance. But over time, as I walked this new path with humility and a genuine desire for connection, the barriers began to erode. Conversations started, tentative and curious, opening doors to dialogues I had once believed impossible. In the end, the epilogue of my story is not one of redemption or forgiveness, for some actions leave scars too deep to be fully healed. Instead, it is an acknowledgement of the power of change, of the capacity for growth even in the most barren of soils. My journey through the darkness, through the realms of life and death, had brought me back to the light, not as the person I had been, but as someone shaped by the depths of my explorations, enriched by the complexity of my reflections. This story, my story, is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the possibility of finding meaning in the midst of despair, and to the enduring capacity for transformation. It is a reminder that the shadows we explore, the darkness we confront, can lead us not only into isolation, but also back to the very essence of what it means to be alive. In the quiet aftermath, in the space between what was and what could be, I found a peace that had eluded me in my restless search for understanding, a peace found not in the answers, but in the beauty of the questions themselves.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the video. We highly recommend you watch the next video here. Oops. I'm waiting for you to click. Yes, you've clicked. Happy watching.